thank you very much indeed. My name's Adam Skinner. Thank you. When Lindsay invited me to come and talk at this event today, I was very excited because when I was a teenager, I really wanted to be a stand-up. And I actually did one gig. I went to my prep school when I was about 16 and did a sort of stand-up gig for all the 12-year-olds about what it was like to go to secondary school. And my then headmaster put a formal complaint into my then later headmaster when I got suspended for a couple of days. So I'm really hoping that today's session goes a little bit better than that. But if not, I'll be looking for a job in a few days' time. So that'll be absolutely great. Yeah, my name's Adam Skinner. I'm going to be talking about two things, actually. How do you generate energy in your PMO? And how do you then evolve it? How do you see it become something bigger and better as time progresses? The job I'm doing at the moment, I work for a company called P2, where it's a transformation consultancy, and I have the grand title of PMO and Portfolio Practice Director. And that basically means it's my job to go into the various PMOs we run, check they are both delivering excellent work, but also check that they are on the cutting edge of what we can offer. So the other half of my job is really to spend a lot of time with companies, both big and small, and look at what the next thing for PMOs is going to be, so we can work out, do we want to offer that or not? And when Lindsay asked me to do this and started talking about energy, I tried to work out where was the most energetic place I've been, what's the most energetic environment I tend to operate in. And that tends to be with startups, believe it or not. So I spend a lot of time working in startups, talking to them about the new stuff they're bringing, the new technologies and the like. So I thought what I'd do to begin with was invite a friend of mine, Alex, onto stage. And Alex actually works for a startup. Alex, come and join us up on stage. So Alex, do you want to quickly introduce yourself and explain who you are and what you do?
Hi. Yeah, so Alex Philpotts. I work at a company called Cubic. They're a very, very small company of only 10 people who are looking to allow large organisations deliver their change portfolios better. How we do that is basically by allowing anybody to integrate with any data source and build beautiful automated reporting.
Great stuff. And why did you move to a startup? What was that?
Well, I had a history in consulting, working in large-scale transformation programs at the likes of RBS and HSBC, and I was a bit disillusioned with the MO, which was often land, generate very, very resource-intensive processes and charge a lot of money for it.
So giant Vodafone-style PMOs, I think is what you're saying.
So we thought, how can we do this better? And so I got a call from Cubic about a year ago. They asked me to join, and now I run their customer success function, which basically means that I have to go and out to our current customers, understand their problems and how they get the most out of our software.
So talk about startups. What's different for you about being a startup? What makes being a startup special?
I suppose it's a sense of living on the breadline. I am the customer success function at Cubic. 1 hour of my time is 2% of a week in that function. We have to carefully and meticulously plan and focus that time because the next meeting could be make or break for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you generate energy in your PMO? What in your startup? What does that look like?
It's really down to the technology.
Yep.
We're constantly looking to drive innovative ways that we can deliver information to executives, to program stakeholders in new ways. Right. We've always been astounded, and also more cost effectively as well. Yeah, sure. We've always been astounded by how long it takes big organisations to produce their monthly governance packs, how many people are manipulating data, and actually is there a more effective way that we can both deliver the message through our cutting edge front end technology as well as the kind of the back end processing that then does that.
So there's something about a vision in there. There's something about really being very clear about what one wants to do. There's something about being on the breadline, knowing that actually it's make or break every other day. There's something really important about innovation, constantly trying to do something new to delight. But how do you know what the right thing to do is?
Well, it's funny. So we're constantly working with our customers. So we're constantly getting feedback, creating that feedback loop and understanding what their objectives are, and then looking to then measure those objectives.
Great stuff. So how would you summarise sort of life in a startup? What are your sort of top tips?
So the key thing is, again, make sure that you're hungry, live on the breadline, act as if this meeting is your last one. I'd say it's certainly in the context of someone that's not in a kind of a customer-facing software business, it's actually understanding who your customers are. If you're working in an internal organisation, that can often be quite difficult. I'd say constantly look to understand how you're delivering benefit to your customers, and make sure that before you start that you deliver those define those customer success metrics. And then finally, look to constantly iterate those benefits and look to deliver new solutions as those customer needs change. And also picking up on the KPI point that was earlier, how people don't like KPIs, and I've stood there alone. I think what's really important is as perceived benefit changes to your customer, you also then need to understand how that change in measurement is going to be. It's really important. The problem that we find with a lot of KPIs and metrics is they don't really mean anything, because often you've started along a journey and actually the benefit that you're providing or what you're delivering is actually changed from that. So it's really important to adjust those measurements as you go.
Brilliant. All right, well, thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate it. So why did I drag Alex up here? Because I actually have a real vision of actually running a PMO that is essentially like a startup, like an innovation hothouse. And if I can pick out what I think some of the key points from what I've seen working with some of these bodies, it's the absolute sense of mission and purpose. That's quite easy. We all know about mission. We all know the value of that. But actually, the flip side is the sense of danger and hunger. This understanding that actually I have to be here to do something. If I'm not, I'm gone. And I think there's a really interesting question you need to ask yourself about whether, if I don't do a good job, is anybody going to notice or complain or worry? How far am I away from being shown the door? Those two go hand in hand to drive innovation and to drive energy. Obsession with customer and customer value, you just cannot get away from that. That absolute need to continually be in the face of your sponsors, others, and hoping to understand why they have you in the room. We'll talk a bit more about that later, but it's come up time and again, particularly when you can't really say in a single word what a PMO is. They all do different stuff. It's down to us to work out what that stuff needs to be to support our customers. Innovation for survival. We always need to be thinking about what the next thing is. How can I continually change what I'm doing? And finally, what I like to call constant real-world tinkering. I loathe the PMO that sits in its little corner and sends out a report. Actually, the real joy of our job is being able to create something and then sit in the board meeting, see how it's received, how it's responded to, and then tinker. And one of the really interesting things about working with startups is they get really excited about seeing how their products work in the real world, because actually that helps them improve that time and time and time again. So energy. And the really interesting thing about energy for me, apologies, so I've got a bit more there. I won't read through those. You can see them later. I've basically tried to put together a number of questions you might want to ask yourself to try and challenge yourself. Are you operating in this fashion, or are you missing a trick? The really important thing about energy. Energy drives evolution. It's almost impossible not to change if you're trying to do this, if you have an environment where everybody's excited and is bouncing around the place. So let me talk a little bit about evolution. What is evolution? Well, there's a range of definitions. The one I particularly like is this. Incremental change. It's incremental change either to reduce a threat or to maximise an opportunity. People often forget that fourth point. It has to be done in an environment that's sensitive. So there has to be somebody who is noticing good or bad performance, or evolution doesn't occur. Because if you're not in that environment, then you can be better. It's not going to make any difference to the amount of value, support, and so on that you get. So, why do we need to evolve? I've stolen this slide from the wonderful Mr. Ralph Finchard, who's come up a few times in these conversations. Ralph does a lot of these kind of talks about the digital PMO and PMO 3.0, and I really like this slide because it talks about what's changed in our world. The one bit I do think that Ralph's missed off this, and he's done that quite deliberately, but I always add it in, is technology has changed. And technology really is very fundamental to what we try and do just as a species, quite frankly. If we aren't on the cutting edge of what's happening in technology, we aren't on the cutting edge of what our business can do. Obligatory quote, this time from Winston Churchill. I always avoid prophesying beforehand because it is much better to prophesy after the event has already taken place. I stick this up for two reasons, partly because actually as a PMO, basically our job is to try and predict the future, which is a bit of a fool's game, as you all know, but there's something quite important about being able to give people a sense of what's going to happen next. The other thing about that is that's exactly what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to try and stand up in front of you and talk about what the future might hold. Now, it might be entirely wrong. All the stuff I'm going to talk about here, though, is not actually science fiction. It's all science fact. It all exists. It's all being done in particular places. I think the trick is to try and work out what might be right for your PMO and for your environment. So, let's talk a bit about where we think the PMO is going to go. Now, being a consultant, you weren't going to get away without a 2x2 matrix on a board somewhere, so sorry about that. But this is my way of trying to think about where the future might go. So at the top, I think we've got two different areas we could evolve into. There's the technological realm we can evolve into, and there's the psychological realm we can evolve to. Something about, can we use good technology to improve us? Something about, can we better understand how people react to us and how people behave to improve what we do? On this side, we've got good governance, and I explain that by saying, how are we helping people make decisions? Because ultimately, everything we do is about trying to help people make better decisions in their organisation. And good organisation, how do we support the smooth running of the organisation? So if we start in the bottom right quadrant, what's happening in the world of technology to support good organisation? Well, I talk quite a bit about the automated PMO, and essentially this is about how do we do what we need to do in a far more efficient and smooth fashion. And if you look at where PMOs have been, and I think we've talked about this quite a bit, but if you look at PMOs, where PMOs have been, you tend to have a PMO lead, you might have a few controls, they do risk and issues, they do planning, and you'll have a chunk of administrative support, basically to manage the data flow and make sure it's tidy. Now, if you look at what occurs in banks, in the retail sector, that's actually insane. You know, actually they have huge amounts of systems that automate that workflow activity. And this is a slide I talk through with quite a lot of organizations, because there's a number of things that I think are going to happen in the future. I think one thing will be about how people access data, how people ask questions, and you already use bots, you've got Siri, various other things like that. At PMO conference last year, a gentleman stood up and showed a bot for the PMO where you phoned it up, you asked it a question and it answered. You know, when's the next program board? Are we red, are we amber, are we green? I think we'll see something whereby data access starts to get automated and we don't have people having to provide that. The actual system flow, the actual flow of information through the PMO is going to start to be more and more automated. And actually, as you start to look at what we should be able to do in terms of standardizing process and the like, that's well within our realm of possibility. I tend to have a lot of people whose basic job is to tidy up the data. So they'll go to a project manager will tell them what's happening on, and they'll do a bit of work to tidy up. Fuzzy logic takes care of that for us. So I think what we'll start to see in the future is systems and PMOs where actually you're stopping using a lot of people to try and clean the data. You're starting to use systems both to push the data in and out and to drag it through the workflow. What that means for us is essentially our job becomes much higher level. We're about leading it. We're providing assurance of that data once it's been tidied. And we're about defining what that data should look like as it flows through. So in terms of the organisation, in terms of technology, you'll see both efficiency and accuracy, because don't forget, this does help accuracy massively, improving through use of systems. So for me, that's kind of the first quadrant of the evolution of the PMO. You then move up to what can technology do to help decision making. And I think this is a really interesting area. I call it predictive analytics. There's an awful lot of conversation about this out there at the moment. There's also a lot of people talking about what it could be. There aren't any really clear definitions, so I'm going to be really clear about what I think each of these things are. But basically, I consider predictive analytics the use of various systems and technology to provide a level of confidence over the data you've got in your PMO. So if you think of what I think of as first-order data, I have been told by my project manager that this milestone is red. I'm going to go and take that into a board. I'm going to tell that to somebody. I consider that first order. I consider second order data my ability to put a level of confidence over that. This project manager has told me it's red. I do not believe them because of X, Y, and Z. Now, actually, that's kind of what everybody in this room does anyway, informally or formally. But we use various human intellect to look at that and say, based on my knowledge of this world, my contextual data, my knowledge of previous programs, I think this is good, bad, indifferent. I think what we're going to start to see is a lot more systems that allow us to put that second order data based on quite large sets of data. So I grew, and I must apologise, I spent about 2 hours trying to find vaguely interesting images to put on this screen. If you can find an interesting image to put on a PowerPoint slide around analytics, you are a better man than me, so please just bear with me. But there are some really interesting areas there. So I think that the analytics world is going to go into 3 different worlds. Behavioural analytics. So for me, that's actually using what I call non-contextual data. I don't need to know data about what the specific program is doing. I need to look at how the various project managers, how the various cost managers, so on and so on, how good are they at prediction? Now, you will all be sitting in your PMOs with a massive data around what PMs have said is going to happen in the future. It's actually incredibly simple then to put a bit of an analytic lens over that, look at those behaviours and say who is good at prediction and who is bad at prediction. Or slightly less judgmentally, which projects struggle to predict the future and which projects do quite well to predict the future. Now, no one else in the organisation can really do that. You're sitting in the PMO, you have that information. It's a very easy way of starting to provide second-order analytics that gives you a sense of where is problems, what's going well, and what's going wrong. So I think of that as behavioural analytics. I think of contextual analytics as what you might think of as machine learning, and that's essentially using big algorithms or some other form of analytics to look at the contextual data in that information, in that program. Now again, this sounds like science fiction, but actually it's what happens in banks all the time to look at fraud. So if you think how banks predict fraud, they look at massive data sets of where people have put credit card transactions in the past. They'll find a small fraction of those are fraudulent. They'll find the variables that drive that fraudulent behaviour, and they'll look for examples of that in current real-time transactions. Now, actually, you can do exactly the same in your PMO, usually at the enterprise level, but you can do exactly the same stuff. You can look at the variables that have led to correct and incorrect predictions around milestones, around costs, and so on and so forth. You can use that to help you understand mainly where areas of concern are bubbling up in your programs or in your portfolio space. And the third area I think of as lessons learned analytics. And I'm a massive fan of lessons learned, particularly when you're sitting at the portfolio space. It's so important to learn what's going on in your organisation, what drives good projects, and apply that knowledge later. What I'm referring to here, though, is actually the automation of that lessons learned activity. So it's the ability to look at a big pot of lessons learned and codify that. So think of a rule of thumb that says something along the lines of, if I've got a program where there's a single program director and he's looking after 30 project managers, that project's going to fail. You can codify that, you can have the systems look for that kind of information. The other side form of lessons learned is actually where you look at overrun costs. So Oxford University is very big on something called reference class forecasting, and that's one's ability to look at very big data sets and say, actually, in general, IT projects and program overrun by X%, they have benefit shortfalls of Y%. Therefore, when I look at new projects and programs coming through my portfolio, I'm going to put a standard contingency around that. So I think you're going to see a real increase in the kind of tools that allow one to use systems to put that second order information. It's particularly valuable when you're at the portfolio level. You can't look in detail at all of your projects and programs because there are just too many of them. So if we move around to what I think of the psychological side, and actually the psychological side for me is about how do we use our understanding of human psychology to improve what we do. This quadrant is for me all about decision making, and actually we are moving away from a world where it's acceptable to walk into a board with a perfect pack of 300 pages that shows a perfect view of what has happened in the past, because that doesn't really help anyone make any decisions. I think there's a couple of things going on in this world. There's something really important about how does one represent information in an easy and helpful to ingest fashion for the executive. This is just one I particularly use. I call it free T reporting. And it's a measure I use for all of my reports. Am I showing the track, what's happened in the past? Am I showing the target, where we think we're going to get to? Am I showing the trend? What do we think is actually happening based on the current position? That allows you to very clearly have a conversation that says, are we on target? If not, do we move the target? Or do we have to increase our trend? Do we have to get better at what we're doing inside? So understanding the decisions that your customers are going to need to make, understand the decisions that your C-suite has to make, creating reports that support them to do that. If you start to look at the psychology, you start to find there's also huge numbers of biases that we as humans suffer from. There's a great book by a guy called Danny Kahneman which is all about those biases called thinking fast and slow. There's a lot of literature around it. Stuff like optimism bias, my overconfidence that I'm going to be deliver. Sunk cost, the fact that I don't want to kill a project once I've already dropped some funds into it. Planning fallacy, the fact that we're all basically rubbish about planning our projects. We in the PMO need to be aware of these biases because it's our job to help protect our decision makers from these problems. There's something incredibly important about knowing what the failures people are going to make when they look at our data because of these psychological biases. And the final area I get quite excited about is something called personalised reporting. Personalised reporting is a world where I'm no longer, as PMO manager, presenting data to the C-suite to help them make decisions. Personalised reporting is where I have empowered them, both in terms of the systems I've given and in terms of the training and coaching I've given to them, to allow them to choose what data they need to make the decisions they need to make. So imagine a world where actually you don't really bother about governance boards anymore. It's your job to make sure the data is there, it's right. It's your job to make sure that the C-suite and they're making decisions can access that data and can make the decisions they need to. It's not a million miles away, and it really will empower our role to help us into a coaching place where we're actually supporting them to access that data. So for me, that's where we look like we're going in a psychological point of view. And the final area I think is really important for us is what I call the Town Hall PMO. There's a great book by a lady called Hilary Scarlett called Neuroscience for Organizational Change. And it basically talks about the fact that we are fundamentally unequipped as a species to manage change. We hate change. It drives fear, it drives anger, it drives all sorts of unpleasant behavior. We, the people who get involved in the change world, the PMO managers and the change people, are slightly odd in that we quite like change, but we forget to get that everyone else really, really does hate it. Now, the main ingredient to stopping that fear is actually communication. It's actually ensuring that one is talking and sharing data, filling the information void that exists in the change world. Because if you don't, they will, and they will always take the most negative point of view. Now, there's something really important for us in the PM about understanding how change drives and scares people. This thing at the top is called the Yerkes-Dodds and inverted U of performance. It basically says if your stress levels go up, you panic and you can't function very, very well. This is the Gartner hype cycle. I'm sure you've seen this. It basically shows the emotions that you go through when you deliver change. Now, my point about labeling these two is that we in the PMO are probably the only people who are equipped to help manage the stress of the organisation when it's going through these changes. Because we in the PMO are the people who have the data that we can share. And also we in the PMO are usually the people that people want to come and talk to or feel comfortable coming to talk to. So I'm a massive fan of the fact that we in the PMO should be equipped to understand that change is stressful. What is the stress level of the organisation? How can I support that stress being at a helpful and sensible place for the organisation? I think the PMO should be acting as the social centre. You can come to us to get coaching, to get support, to help you understand what's going to be happening next. And PMO is a storyteller. I don't think you can present data in its raw form and expect people to accept it. I think you need to understand that what we tend to do is tell stories about that data, and it kind of drops up into that box around how one understands the biases that people operate. But I think we should be actively trying to get out there and use our information to tell stories about what's happening with the data to help people take and make decisions. But if we don't understand how people think, how people make decisions, how people react to change, the organisation is going to be put into a really very difficult place. And if nobody else is going to do this, so if they don't, who's going to do that? It really is up to us to use that information in a way that supports the organisation. So what? There's a load of stuff up here. Some of it might happen, some of it might not happen. You might choose to use it, you might choose not to use it. And I see a kind of huge range of PMOs that do different things. But I did want to finish up with what that might mean for us as PMO leaders, PMO managers who want to do this as a career in different organisations and so on and so forth. So what's my first point? I think we need to cyborg up. I think there's something really important about knowing how to use technology and being familiar with technology. And I'm not talking here about big PPM systems. There's amazing stuff you can do with, I'd say, Excel, PowerPoint, and I'd add Power BI to that, actually. If you've not come across that, that's definitely worth looking into. It's an analytics tool, really quite powerful stuff. But if you don't know how to use that, you're going to really struggle, I think, to do some of the stuff that needs to happen going forward. Scholar up. PMO profession it's a profession. We're professionals, and that's not just about knowing a range of processes. That's about understanding what the cutting edge of our profession does. That's about combining both the art of what we do and the science of what we do. It becomes a craft. It's on us to understand what we can do and how we can apply that stuff. So I'm absolutely committed that we need to be pushing ourselves in this world. I do think efficiency is going to come from, perhaps this is too hard, perhaps the loss of the admin role is too hard. I think what I'm trying to get is, I think we're going to move away from a world where you can justify a person whose job is just to capture data and tidy that data up. But the positive side of that is people really get the value of the PMO role. And actually the PMO role becomes incredibly high value, I believe, in the future. It's a role that's looking to be the energizer, be the coach, and be the comfort blanket for the organisation. It's a role that's looking to provide assurance and foresight. I think that's so important. It's our ability to give people confidence over what the future holds or where there are challenges in that future. It's providing the intellectual drive for the organisation. On the IPMO course, we talk a lot about Slack, that ability to create time where you can think about what needs to happen next. I think that really does need to happen. I think PMO, people who are attracted to PMO are the sort of people who quite enjoy or do that sort of stuff, perhaps more so than your project management brethren. So I do think it's quite important that we take that mantle onto ourselves. And it's about innovating, because actually that's the thing that keeps you continuously improving and driving energy. And it's about being a leader. I really am committed to that. I think it's such an exciting time we are in the world of PMO in terms of people getting excited about what we can do and the value we can offer. So, listen, let me just close it down now, bringing you back to what I call the virtuous circle of innovation. So, we talked a bit about energy, and almost by definition, energy drives that evolution. You almost can't evolve. It's almost impossible to have energy that doesn't drive some form of change or some sort of continuous improvement. But what's really interesting is actually, as you start to drive that continuous improvement, it creates energy. People start getting excited about what you're doing, and it creates this wonderful virtual circle whereby you're driving energy into the system, evolving, which is pumping energy back in. And ultimately, that's our job as PMO leaders, to try and drive that energy and that evolution in our organisations. As you can see, I get quite excited about this stuff, so do feel free to add me on LinkedIn if you want to share or chat about any of this stuff. I think it's really, 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 really fun, really, really great, and I think it's a great time to be in PMOs. And I think that's everything I'm going to say, Lindsay, if that's okay. Thank you very much.
Good stuff, thank you very much.